The Bitcoin Standard podcast brings you seminars from Saifedean.com, my independent online learning platform where you can take my online courses on the economics of Bitcoin and economics in the Austrian school tradition, join our 2 live weekly seminars, and read my books before they are published. Sign up now for access to the draft of my forthcoming economics textbook, Principles of Economics, and take 5 full online courses based on my books, The Bitcoin Standard, The Fiat Standard, and Principles of Economics. The Bitcoin Standard podcast is brought to you by Crowd Health. Crowd Health is the Bitcoiner's answer to fiat health insurance. If you listen to this show, you've probably heard me rail against the problems of modern healthcare and health insurance. Crowd Health is a brilliant new solution to this problem that leverages the power of Bitcoin to help people get affordable healthcare. Crowd Health holds its cash reserves in Bitcoin. It negotiates with healthcare providers on your behalf and gets you much better rates by offering to pay them cash, upfront, without having to go through the expensive bureaucracy of modern healthcare insurance. It's a solution that works better for healthcare providers and for patients by disintermediating large insurance companies who have the wrong incentives and are constantly raising costs. I'm very happy to have signed up for Crowd Health, and I'm really excited to support them as they disrupt the fiat health insurance industry. Go to joincrowdhealth.com and use the discount code SAIF, S-A-I-F, and you'll get the first 6 months for $99 only.
Coinbits. Coinbits is a great way to introduce your pre-coiner friends and family to Bitcoin. Get them set up in under a minute and help kickstart their journey by turning everyday spare change into Bitcoin. This Bitcoin-only app takes the uncertainty and fear out of Bitcoin saving by rounding up debit and credit card purchases to the nearest dollar, then using the difference to buy Bitcoin. Set it, forget it, and let the app automatically tax your high-time preference spending by saving the hardest money ever. Want to save in Bitcoin faster? Customers can multiply their roundups up to 10x or adjust their savings frequency for weekly or daily Bitcoin stacking. Coinbits is built on a sound, tried and true dollar cost averaging strategy that turns Bitcoin's volatility in your favor. Once you've gotten a private wallet set up, Coinbits encourages you to withdraw your Bitcoin to your own private wallet and embrace the Bitcoin Standard way of life. Start stacking on coinbitsapp.com and save your time and energy in the soundest money ever.
The Bitcoin Standard podcast is brought to you by CoinKite. CoinKite are my favorite makers of Bitcoin hardware. They produce the legendary Open Dime, the first Bitcoin bearer asset, as well as the reliable Cold Card hardware wallet, the excellent stainless steel seed plates for storing your seed phrases, and the block clock. Now, CoinKite have produced the Sats card, a card the size of a credit card which can store Bitcoin and works great as a gift. CoinKite have just produced a limited edition gorgeous Bitcoin Standard Sats card, which carries the Bitcoin Standard logo, and you can get it from coinkite.shop/Bitcoin Standard. Use the code Bitcoin Standard to get 5% off your purchase. Get paid in Bitcoin regardless of who you work for and regardless of who is paying you. All thanks to a premium service I personally love and use, and that is Bitwage. Thanks to Bitwage, I receive my books royalties in Bitcoin. It is cheaper, faster, and easier. It is a true set it and forget it system, and Bitwage has been offering this premium service since 2014. Anyone can sign up and use it right away. No restrictions or limits, fully non-custodial. You can even split your incoming payment, get part in Bitcoin and part to a bank account you specify. It could not be easier, and I cannot recommend Bitwage highly enough. Go to bitwage.com and sign up now and get paid in Bitcoin with your next payment or salary. Good to see you, man.
Great to see you. Thanks for making this happen. Really excited.
How have you been?
It's good. I wasn't expecting the year to start this way, being thrust into this conversation. And I didn't think it was even going to be that, kind of talking about the system being rigged, but it seems like, to me, it wasn't really that newsworthy, but people seem to want to know what's going on, and I think they believe that, I was a white dude kind of seeing how the system was rigged, which is true. So it's been gratifying to talk about. I mean, it's an issue we really care about. So the Bitcoin community has been it's moms and Bitcoin community has been they've been the two communities that have really been amped up about this.
That's really fascinating. Moms and Bitcoiners.
There you go. I think those are the two groups that are going to lead us to save our country. I think.
I think, if I were to put my obviously biased explanation to it, I would say they're the people that are most concerned about the long term and the people with the lowest time preference. So like mothers suddenly have this child of theirs that they love so much and they wanted to live another 60, 80, 100 years healthy and happy. And so they have a much lower time preference in the way that they focus on things. And I tend to think Bitcoin is a little bit like that. That's why the food message is so resonant among Bitcoiners. I mean, once people get the orange pill, it's only a matter of time before they start shedding a lot of the garbage that the food industry wants to feed everybody, which is the topic of today's conversation. So tell us a little bit first about your background, how you got into this nefarious business as a drug dealer.
Yeah. So right now, I mean, looking forward, I'm, entrepreneur trying to change the incentives of our food health system, which I think is the biggest issue in the world. And it goes back to my early career. So I got into this business, I was born and raised in the swamp in Washington, D.C. And I was a good young conservative lad and, getting into politics for the right reasons. I was ideological and, worked in campaigns early in my career and, trying to push American competitiveness forward. And what I learned quickly is that whether you're on the left or the right in the US, when those campaigns are over, you inevitably go into consulting. And like many people who finish campaigns early in my career, I was across the table from pharma executives and food executives. And, everything in DC, everything in our world, right, is so normalized, I went to Harvard Business School and see all my friends go to food companies, to pharma companies, that high level are doing bad things, but everyone can kind of go to sleep at night. And that's definitely true in DC, and these stories, in retrospect are kind of shocking, but it's shockingly normalized, when you're sitting around the table. And what I saw early in my career, is literally like lists of professors, around this time, 2010, the opioid issue was heating up. And it was, how do we find friendly professors to suggest for panels and different organizations to talk about opioid policy? And it was, the president of Stanford Med School was on that list, who was a pain specialist. And I literally watched as, this person was put on a list in Washington, D.C., and Pfizer, who's a big opioid maker, donates $4 million to Stanford, for a new, pain initiatives. And then that dean of the school is put on a panel at the NIH to make opioid policy, which suggested more lenient, opioid use, and led to just complete devastation. But these things, these moves, these economic moves are literally played out like chess. And then on the other side, and I didn't understand the connection at the time, but food was a major client. And, this story resonated a lot, but I saw, around this time as well, Coca-Cola and Pepsi were trying to keep soda on food stamps, which is a government nutrition program, that 15% of the American people depend on. This obviously makes no sense. Soda is just pure diabetes water, has, I would say negative nutritional value. But, it's a playbook. It's like, how do we rig the institutions of trust? And literally saw as Coke executives these, kind of a grotesque image, these old white guys go into the NAACP and other civil rights groups that are very respected in the United States and pay millions of dollars for these civil rights groups to label opponents as racist, to label parents who are concerned about their kids drinking more soda racist. They went to think tanks to pay off think tanks and produce bogus studies. And then, of course, the soda companies went to universities. And that's a real theme that I really saw that really influenced how I think about this today. Leading universities from Harvard and Stanford on down are little more than public relations entities. And in the case of food, processed food companies pay 11 times more than the NIH for basic nutrition research, which got us the Harvard study saying that sugar didn't cause obesity, which has led to a lot of the devastating nutritional policies we still suffer from to this day.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fascinating, the extent of the corruption. And it's, these stories keep coming out periodically. You're not the first person to bring this out, obviously. And they always make a splash and people sort of come to accept them. But it's fascinating to me that they continue to nonetheless expect somebody else to do something about it. But they continue to, in many cases, just accept it as a normal part of reality and continue to consume the products of these very same companies. Like this is what I find astonishing, and you can understand it when you're trying to quit those things and you realize just how addictive they are.
Right.
And that there's a lot of rationalization that goes on here, but people, I think, really need to keep listening to those stories, because it's very true. And it's in my second book, The Fiat Standard, I talk about Harvard University in particular when it comes to sugar. So the guy who started the nutrition department there is a guy named Frederick Stair. And Nina Teicholz writes about him in her book, and I think Gary Taubes also talks about him. And this guy, I mean, he was getting tons of money from the 1960s onwards from the food industry. And he heavily promoted all these insane ideas of sugar is a healthy, nice snack, harmless, it's good. Stair rejected the idea that the American diet was harmful, stating, for example, that Coca-Cola was a healthy between-meal snacks. I'm going to share this one sec. Stair rejected the idea that the American diet was harmful, stating, for example, that Coca-Cola was a healthy between-meal snacks and that eating even great amounts of sugar would not cause health problems. In his autobiography, Stair states that in 1960 he obtained a grant of $1,026,000 from General Foods for the expansion of the school's nutrition research laboratories. Imagine $1 million in 1960.
That's a lot. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money.
That was serious money. That was, at that point, gold was $35 an ounce. So this is a lot of money. And then in the 44 period, and this, we're continuing the quote now, and that in the 44-year period as a nutritionist, he raised a total of $29,630,000 something dollars. For instance, Kellogg's funded $2 million to set up the Nutrition Foundation at Harvard. The foundation was independent of the university and published a journal, Nutrition Reviews, that Stair edited for 25 years. Stair also co-founded and served as chairman of the board of directors for the American Council on Science and Health. In 1980, during his tenure as chairman, he sought funding from U.S. tobacco giant Philip Morris USA for ACSH's activities. This is basically the pinnacle of fiat science in Harvard University. This is the guy. He was living off of the sugar industry, General Foods, Kellogg's, and running journals and running nutrition departments in Harvard.
As I said, I am a Harvard grad. I'm involved in some initiatives at Harvard. I want to speak extremely plainly here. This, what you have on the screen here, there is millions of lives of blood on what happened here on this clinical kind of exchange of funds. And you go, yeah, that $1 million back then, right? This was a ton of money. And it's still happening today to an actually much more pronounced degree. And you just have to ask, are Kellogg, are the sugar companies, do they want something, right? Even today, we're battered over the head that, oh, there's a wall, there's not a conflict. These donations can't influence the science. It's like, let me tell you, Kellogg and these sugar companies paying, in today's terms, tens of millions of dollars. Back then, now there's billions of dollars spent on nutrition research. They want something. And what happened here is that this research was taken directly by Kellogg, by soda companies, by other sugar companies, and brought to Capitol Hill, brought to schoolhouses to influence childhood nutrition policies. It led, of course, to the disastrous 1990s food pyramid. Now, one thing in America that's interesting is that we actually do listen to our medical professionals, right? We actually do, even with the vaccine, most people did take the vaccine. We actually do have respect in America for our medical professionals. And when that food pyramid came out, it dramatically shifted the American diet. So you can actually look at a graph of the components of the American diet by fats and carbs. Carbs as a percentage of the American diet in the 7 years after the release of the food pyramid, which this study led to, went up 20%. And fats, healthy fats, went down 20%. Absolute devastation to the cells of Americans. Carbs and sugar, right? That's our cells' fuel, glucose. Sugar consumption has gone up 100x in 100 years.
Here it is. Also from the Fiat Standard.
There we go. So look at these lines, right? Really dramatic grains, which the food pyramid pushed, which the processed part, the processing has only happened recently, but the processing is ripping off the fiber from the grains. So it's just the inner shell, which is self-stable, but has very limited nutritional value and essentially converts to sugar in the blood. So grains are a hidden sugar. Fresh fruits have been actually genetically modified to include more sugar, even if they're quote organic. And these ingredients at the bottom, right? These ingredients that our body evolutionarily out for hundreds of thousands of years are made to ingest and eat. These are plummeting. So it's all processed foods going up and all. So that's what it's just like. We just have to use common sense. When Harvard, when studies are paid for tens of millions of dollars, right? And then those studies come out saying sugar doesn't cause obesity, we should be eating more sugar and carbs, less fats. That's then used to influence policy. And we would hope, right, that this was over, but this is only happening in more hyperdrive today. The most recent nutritional study, the Banner nutritional study funded by the National Institute of Health, is funded to Tufts University, which is a leading nutrition school. On the study, it's millions of dollars from the NIH and millions of dollars from food companies. So food companies can actually jointly fund with the NIH a study. There was a joint press release saying that this study is the most comprehensive nutrition research ever conducted. And it's called the Tufts NIH Food Compass. And it's saying that Lucky Charms are 3 times healthier than eggs, and that Honey Nut Cheerios are significantly more healthier than beef. And just like what created this, we kind of think that this food pyramid is a relic of the 90s and over. No. The 2020 nutritional guidelines, 95% of the folks on that committee were directly paid for by food and pharma companies. And just recently, just this week, the folks were appointed to the 2025 nutritional committees. There's massive conflicts of interest. The majority of folks on that panel are paid for, with research by pharma and food, including now significant conflicts with an obesity drug to basically profit from this mess, this miracle obesity cure. What one woman was just on 60 Minutes, who's now a chief person on the panel that's going to make our children's nutritional guidelines, saying that obesity, which is only really an issue in the last 50 years, is a genetic condition, and that we should be going to surgical first and drug first, not talking about personal choice, not talking about eating healthy, that's actually a fallacy, that even if people eat healthy, they'll still be fat. So this continues to this day.
Yeah, this is the Tufts Food Compass. I just pulled it out. So let's see what these people are saying, what you should eat. Frosted mini wheats are basically in third place. So first place is watermelon. Second place is kale, essentially nutrient-free. And then you've got frosted mini wheats, which is anti-nutrient full. Unsweetened almond milk. This is like their idea of nutritious food. And then at the absolute bottom of the chart is ground beef.
That's right.
6 out of 100.
One of the most nutrient-dense foods you could possibly have. Whole eggs and butter. So,
yeah.
So this study was funded millions of dollars by Danone, which is one of the largest processed food makers. They're actually the industry leader, world leader in creating almond milk. And what this graph doesn't even show is that chocolate almond milk is actually rated higher. It's in the 90s above grass-fed Greek yogurt. Okay. Additionally, you have dozens of name brand cereals, dozens in the green, in encouraged. You have the author, the researchers who conducted the study, who are leaders of the White House Nutrition Conference, who are world-renowned leaders in nutrition. Actually, with this pushback, they're now vociferously defending Lucky Charms. They're saying Lucky Charms absolutely are a health food, absolutely should be encouraged. I can tell you right now, and again, your viewers can, I am not a doctor, I'm not a nutritionist, but I can tell you, and I think we're being gaslit.
But you have a digestive system.
Yeah. And
you've had one all of your life.
I think this goes to why I think, Bitcoiners are really amped up on this issue. It's like we're being asked to not believe our eyes. like we're being asked by elites to just literally believe, absolute insanity. And as kids are dramatically seeing increased rates of allergies, autoimmune conditions, chronic conditions. 25% of children now have prediabetes. Okay, 25%. We are being asked to shut up and trust the science. And, in the wake of violence happening to our kids, clearly unprecedented situations, obviously tied to food, we're being asked, even folks, my partner, Justin Maris, and I have been, proud to be pushing this food compass thing. Joe Rogan tweeted to link to some stuff we wrote, and we've been helping get it on a lot. Fox News, which is the only network that's going to cover this, we've been in touch, and they've been covering it every night. We've been absolutely brutalized by professors and academics saying that we have no idea what we're talking about. Well, I think a lot of people are waking up. I think Bitcoiners are waking up. I think moms are waking up, as we talked about. I think it is absolutely appropriate, as we're seeing a classroom with 45% of children overweight. It's appropriate to be asking questions right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very clear that there are a lot of problems with the way that food is consumed. I think one of the most depressing things I see is I walk around and I'll look at a school class who's in the school playground, or kids in their backyard playing. Even like if you're looking at a soccer practice and kids are all dressed up in their soccer kits, the majority of kids are still obese. Like, this is an extremely common thing. It's a majority of young kids are obese, and it's just a completely different type of childhood that they live. For the majority of us, I think in our generation, people who are now in their 30s or 40s, things were bad always with the candy, but I think at that time we weren't quite as devastated by the food as we are right now. And if you look over the years, I'm quite convinced by the research of Kate Shanahan from Deep Nutrition, where she explains that you see that this damage accumulates over time. So it's not just that you eat bad today, you feel bad tomorrow. What you eat today is going to reflect the health of your children that you're going to conceive soon, and then that's going to carry through in their life. And I think it's been accumulating over the years because kids who are being born today were born to parents who spent their entire life eating industrial garbage, whose parents mostly didn't eat as much industrial garbage. So kids these days have it a lot tougher than us metabolically. They have a lot more metabolic damage accumulated in their genes from their parents than we do. And so it's reaching a crisis point. It really is. I think it's absolutely insane when you think about it. It's to the point where it's expected that the majority of activities that children do are simply getting together and consuming enormous amounts of sugar. And it's marketed as this, the fun thing where, since we all get together, we all excuse each other, we all provide each other with an excuse, we all, we all indulge, and it's the way that we can be healthy friends, and it's the way that we can have a regular healthy friendship. It's just such a normalized part of friendship, and there's so much marketing effort that goes toward normalizing sugar binges as the default state of childhood, rather than moving, going out, being a child, doing stupid things, and climbing stuff, and being places you're not supposed to be going. All of that is becoming less and less tolerated as a part of childhood, because on the one hand, kids can't do it anymore because they're so much lazier and fatter. Right. And on the other hand, because all of their life is programmed around shitty, sugary sludge, basically.
I mean, profound points. Going back to my early work with food companies, this isn't complicated what the strategy is. We had a playbook, and the playbook is around normalization. That's just like an absolute core principle. You go back to the cigarette playbook, it's muddy the science, it's fund as many studies as possible to seed doubt, and it's normalize these things. It's, get the cigarettes in movies, get the cigarettes, have doctors in the ads. So when I was working for the food companies, we actually had a huge push, and a big strategy for them was schools and hospitals. So food companies actually Big Soda spends an inordinate amount of time and attention to get their products into schools and hospitals. And to this day, the majority of pediatric wards in the United States have soda machines. that sell sugary drinks to this day. I was just, we just had our first son this year, in the past year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And as we talked about, that's a huge, it does change your perspective. It's cliche, but this does change your perspective. Looking at the world these little guys are going into. I mean, it's heartbreaking. But right, just feet from where he was born, there is a soda machine, and the mom is, fed, is served, offered soda and orange juice, which I think is just as bad. Right after birth. So hospitals, we've normalized it. It's literally where we give birth. My mom, another instance in my life that's highly led me to being passionate about this, dying recently of cancer, which is highly tied to food, which we can get into. She was diabetic. The diabetes led to, in many ways, to her cancer, which we can get into more, and offered soda literally on her deathbed as a diabetic dying of cancer of like this is how normalized it is in the hospital settings. And then schools, the vast majority of high schools now still have vending machines that sell sugary drinks. And that's a huge push, right? So when we normalize it, right, as you said, now it's just, you are a terrible parent if for your 2-year-old's birthday, you're not serving cake. And looking at these kids around sugar, these 2-year-olds, it's indistinguishable from looking at a bunch of meth addicts, right? This is a highly dopamine triggering chemical that has no nutritional value. I'm a libertarian. I actually think most drugs should be legal, but we have to be very clear-eyed. We have allowed a highly addictive, harmful drug to weaponize our food and be totally normalized for kids. It's like, just getting to the point about everyone being obese and looking at kids' classrooms, I'm a libertarian. I'm a big free choice guy. I've actually shifted my opinion a lot on this. I think it is gaslighting from the system to say what's happening to the people and to children as a result of personal choice and laziness. You don't have a classroom of 5-year-olds where the majority of kids are obese based on personal choice. We have a totally rigged system where we've taken a highly powerful drug. And this is just, again, it's just kind of in the past 50 years, we weaponized our food with this highly dopamine increased. So I actually have a lot of sympathy. And again, I think the first thing that we need to do, and I do think this is happening. I do think that people are waking up around COVID and around asking questions, but we've got to just understand at a baseline, our food and our systems have been weaponized against us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, something's wrong with my camera. I'm not sure what it is.
No problem.
I'm interested in hearing, what are some of the common science memes that most people think of as science, but in reality are just really big food marketing terms? I think one big one I've heard is the good old you need to eat in moderation, everything in moderation, and a balanced diet. It's closely related cousin. Those two, I think, are classic examples of basically Coca-Cola and big food marketing slogans that were dreamt up in the marketing boardroom and handed down to universities for scientists to coincidentally all arrive at it at the same time. And the idea that, I find it astonishing that this even works. Like, when people just say in moderation. Well, what is moderation? Like, what is it? What is a moderate amount of sugar? What is a moderate amount of soy? What is a moderate amount of corn? What is a moderate amount of alcohol? What is a moderate amount of red meat? Like 1 gram, 100 grams, 1,000 grams. For all of these things, you're going to have an enormously different profile, and you can normalize whatever you want. So most people, they talk about it being balanced and moderation, but in reality, they end up pigging out on sugar and they end up getting enormously addicted to sugar. But in their mind, it's balance and moderation. Wow. And the reason this thing inevitably leads to it is that balance and moderation, you cannot do them easily with highly addictive substances that are specifically weaponized in order to get your mind to be addicted to them.
Yeah, I think it gets to how we've really been gaslighted by the system to think and define what a drug is. We have opioids are prescribed and, okay in some circumstances, but psychedelics, which aren't addictive and lead to greater, understanding and empathy, are stigmatized. And then sugar is seen as not really, kind of frivolous and not really a drug. But it actually, if you actually trace the devastation that sugar's caused and the addiction that it can wring, it's actually, I would say, one of the most harmful drugs, because it is subtle and does cause a lot of. So we just need to have like a baseline here. And I think this is just, it's a simple, but I think important point. Sugar is a powerful drug. And what utter gaslighting to put that food pyramid out and to continue to this day. Oh, it's a treat. Oh, it's a treat. Let's just have moderation. That's like saying, oh, heroin, we could just a little bit. It's fine. This is it's this gateway. It's this wink, wink, right? Let's just dig into what sugar is. Let's just dig into what's in Coke. It actually gets even worse. What we subsidize now with corn, right, turns into high fructose corn syrup. This is just a recent understanding, and there's been some books about this. Fructose is a special kind of sugar. Now, this is in most of our kids' food. This is the main sugar that we use now, fructose. Fructose shuts off our hunger signals. It actually, literally, it's the type of sugar in fruit. And evolutionarily, and there's been some great books on this called Drop Acid and Nature Wants Us to Be Fat. But it basically is like we didn't used to have like a lot of fruit, right? We didn't use, like, this used to be actually for humans on down. It used to be feast or famine cycles. So we were well advised that if we saw a big patch of fruit to eat as much as humanly possible. And the fructose in that food actually shuts down our hunger signals, so we can actually eat as much as possible and load ourselves with sugar and actually save some fat for later. Right. So that's actually the like evolutionary purpose of fructose. Now we derive that from corn and put it into all of our food, which shuts off our hunger signals and actually just like makes us want to compulsively eat more. That's what we're saying to kids to eat in moderation. So we've literally, I mean this word literally, we've literally weaponized our food to shut off kids' hunger signals and make it highly addictive. And even the CDC, even with the new guidelines, they say 20% of calories, 10 to 20% of calories for sugar for kids is okay. I mean, it's just crazy. It's literally, I really think it's akin to saying, well, 20% of your diet being heroin, something with no nutritional value that's highly addictive and potentially destructive long-term, that's okay. That's okay, because you'll be able to keep that under control. Complete and utter just a fallacy there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the key thing, a key point here is that sugar in its current form is extremely different from what historically people used to have. So yeah, hundreds or thousands of years ago, maybe if you did come across a bunch of berries that happened to be in season and not and that have not been ripped up by other creatures that would have eaten them as soon as they saw them ripen. If you managed to come across it, it was a rare thing. But then when you did get it, the fruits were nowhere near as sweet as what we have now, which we've been selectively breeding over hundreds of years to make more and more sugar. And so that is very different. But also, I think the white sugar itself is also very, very different. Like, this is also, it's never been this cheap. Yeah, the refined white sugar has never been anywhere near as cheap as what it is right now. It used to always be very difficult to attain. It used to be expensive because it's difficult. But with machinery, we can just print more of it. Like, it faces very little limits on how much we can produce from it, because you can just industrialize and increase the efficiency of industrialization.
If you don't think sugar is a drug, right? There's this book, Empire, by Neil Ferguson, about the British Empire. And, as the British Empire was really being built and, on their trade, sugar, was one of the key in the 1700s, 1800s, was one of the key exports. And it was like this treasure jewel because it was a drug, because it was a highly addictive drug. There were massive wars fought when they figured out how to refine sugar. And it was this cherished, delicacy. Because of the impact that it had on someone's body as it was used less. It was really, it was a highly coveted drug. And that's what it was seen as. And, when I say weaponized, right, we've just in the past 50 years or so found this cheap way to highly process it and just weaponize our food, and how to create even more dangerous forms of sugar, like we talked about fructose with corn, and taking it out of that. So this really is and we really have to look back at history where when sugar came on the scene in a real way, in the past couple hundred years as a delicacy, there was no compunction about it. This was like a powerful drug. And for the vast majority of human history, this was very rare in fruits. And of course, the fruit that hasn't been genetically modified to have even more sugar, but those fruits also were combined with fiber, which blunts the sugar impact. You always ate sugar with fiber, in fruits and other foods. So what's happening is totally unprecedented. I think we need to look at everything through the lens of dopamine, and I think have some understanding that dopamine drives everything that we do. And when you make food highly addictive, that's how you get to a situation where 80% of the country right now, is overweight or obese, where 93% of the country is metabolically dysfunctional, where prediabetes and diabetes rates among adults is 50%, which is totally unprecedented, where autoimmune conditions, allergies, all these things are going off the charts. I don't think Americans are systematically trying to shorten their lives, are systematically trying to fatten and damage the cells of their children, are systematically trying to die, younger, for the first time since 1860 in American history, where, our life expectancy is now plummeting again. I don't think all these things are happening by choice. It's because dopamine is the most powerful regulator of what we do, and our food is just totally weaponized. And getting to your question about other memes and other, I think this whole idea and embracing that sugar is a drug and really trying to unwind that, not from even a command and control policy, but just from a human and public policy perspective, understanding that we've really gotten off track there. I think another thing that I saw, going back to my early days working for these food companies, is this lie that nutrition and food is complicated. I think there's a systematic effort to fund thousands and thousands of nutritional studies, to have for the news a new report every single day saying, oh, it's salt, oh, it's sugar, oh, it's fat. This is part of a strategy. The distraction and number of studies is the strategy. And I think we really take that bait time and time again. If you listen to a true independent, whether they're vegan or whether they're carnivore, the real independent, smart nutrition folks are actually in many ways saying the same thing. It's whole foods. It's just think about what our body evolutionarily is made to eat. It is whole foods that have good micronutrients, that aren't loaded with a bunch of hormones and antibiotics. If you can literally just go and say, did a person eat this, 5,000 years ago? Does it have processed seed oils, sugar, grains out? You get about 90% there. And I was part of this. It's a systematic effort to distract. They literally have a calendar. It's like, oh, we're going to blame salt. We're going to blame. It's just blaming a new thing every day to distract us from the fact that nutrition actually is relatively simple. We need to get back to basics. We need to stop trying to outsmart the body with just the next miracle drug or the next Frankenfood. If we got back to whole foods, if we cut 3 ingredients from our diet, added sugar, seed oils, and processed grains, you would have a complete wipeout of diabetes, heart disease, and a bunch of other metabolic conditions, including Alzheimer's, which is now called type 3 diabetes, which is highly, highly tied to food.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely spot on in the fact that they seek to complicate it, and I think that you see this in so many areas of modern fiat academia. Economics, I've said before, basically modern economics is like a DDoS attack on people's ability to understand what's actually going on with their banking and monetary system. Effectively, you've got tens of thousands of people with PhDs publishing papers that nobody reads 1% of the papers that are published. So not a single person can even read 1% of them. There's so many papers being published, and it's such an enormous output of scholarship on all kinds of hypotheses that are really irrelevant to the average person's experience with the world. And the sum of it, the sum output of it is that you end up with people just being unable to process all of this information and then just defaulting for going along with the herd, which is what the CNN says and what the New York Times says. And it's just what everybody says. It just becomes the predominant narrative. And of course, it's shaped through advertisement, through Hollywood, and through all of these mainstream media organs. You see it in economics, you see it in nutrition. And it's very amazing when you snap out of the brainwashing on one of these by just simply listening to yourself, thinking, trying to think this through with your own mind. And in the case of food, just take the crazy decision of spending 1 week eating differently and see how it works for you, and then make your own mind up. If you're willing to take that kind of plunge into the dark, which is really not such a big deal, but if you're willing to prioritize that over what is being said in TV or the newspaper, you realize just what a ridiculous waste of time these fields of knowledge are. Like, what are these people doing in all those nutrition departments? Like, we really don't need to be paying people from inflation, making inflationary monetary policy and taxing people so that we can finance thousands of PhDs in nutrition to study all kinds of obscure, irrelevant mechanisms and acronyms and names and produce an enormous flood of things on PubMed. Everything causes and prevents cancer. Everything can cause and prevent cancer. And yet, in any case, just listen to what the pharmaceutical companies and the drug companies and the food companies are all repeating on mainstream media, which is get your 6 to 10 ratios of grain per day and eat your plant protein and don't eat a lot of meat, and basically just eat cheap industrial waste. That's the sum of all the science. Like, there's so much output, and yet the conclusion always leads to the same kind of industrial garbage that's highly profitable. It's the same crap that's in your supermarket, all of it. And it really is the same crap in that if you walk in the supermarket, the vast majority of things that you get are just corn and soy, essentially, and seed oils. Corn, soy, and seed oils, and then a bunch of preservatives and flavorings and coloring, turning it into all kinds of different concoctions. That's the majority of the stuff. And the vast majority of food is just coming from these foods. And yet the research is just constantly flooding people with all of this really irrelevant trivia. Like, you don't need all of that trivia. Stuff. You just need, it really is irrelevant trivia. Like, you just need to think, did somebody 500 years ago manage to eat this thing or not? If they could eat it, if they could eat it 500 years ago, then I'm probably okay eating it now. If you just did that, you're going to be better off than anybody who spends any time trying to take whatever is published on PubMed seriously.
I mean, I don't know if you saw recently, just this past week, massive news coverage of the gas stoves. And, an academic paper saying that gas stoves, just having gas stoves in the house, led to childhood allergies. And this happens every week. There's an academic study, it's almost like when you it's like this kind of black comedy. It's like a movie, right? It's like we have 25% of kids with prediabetes. We have, 50% of 12-year-olds overweight or obese. We have, mass chronic conditions, autoimmune conditions, and then the media is literally like, well, why is all this happening? They're literally leading medical journalists literally have been reporting the past week. They've said, we don't know what's causing this exponential increase in childhood obesity. And at the same time, you're having gas stoves being blamed. It's almost like this comical level of distraction, which feeds into every economic interest. The media both is funded by pharma heavily, and they just need something new to cover, right? If the story is, we need to get back to basics in whole foods, that's kind of a boring story, right? So there's this voracious appetite for the next peer-reviewed study, for the next expert, for the next little wrinkle, for the next disagreement. That's like table stakes. That has to happen for the media. And then, of course, as you said, there's this absolute industrial complex in the medical and research establishment, both in nutrition, both in health, both, economics, to have that one little niche and just disagree about trivia. And I can unpack this a little bit, how I see it on the medical establishment. My sister, Dr. Calley Means, who started a company called Levels Health, which is part of the movement to give people more data about what's happening in their bodies with glucose. Amazingly, just as an aside, many U.S. states don't even allow patients to see their medical records anymore. That literally the patient doesn't have legal ownership of their medical records. So companies like Levels and some of the biowearables giving people more data, I think that's a huge part of the solution. But she was president of her Stanford class, top of her class at Stanford Med School. And I think it's very instructive that a doctor, and she talks about this, graduating med school, has to choose one of 42 specialties. So this is all in the past 50 years, but we've divided the body, and there's more and more specialties cropping up now obesity, obesity doctors is a new specialty, right? But we've broken the body into 42 subspecialties. She went into head and neck surgery, and then there's 82 subspecialties underneath the 42. So she actually was focusing her entire career on like 2 millimeters of the body. And the dean of Stanford Med School at the time was a head and neck surgeon, and he mentored her. And he actually did a fellowship and focused on 1 millimeter of the body. And some obscure part of the nose was actually named after him, some disease that he discovered. And she, in residency, is focused on this 2 square millimeters, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times she's doing surgeries where she's cutting out sinus inflammation. Okay, so doctors devote their lives. If you really focus hard in a specific area, you can become dean of a med school. You focus on one little area. And she had this come to Jesus moment and this kind of out of body experience, she says, in her 5th year, where she's doing her 3rd sinusitis surgery of the day, where she's, literally a passed out patient beneath her. She's cutting open their face. She's taking out the effects of this inflammation in their sinuses that are so serious they need surgical interventions. And she looked down at the patient and she realized that patient was under her knife 6 months before. And she understood that a lot of her patients are actually coming back under the knife with more inflammation. And then she realized that she had no idea why that patient actually had inflammation. At Stanford Med School, Harvard Med School, on down, doctors are not taught why people get sick. They're only taught about the interventions and the specific niche interventions. But the problem is that we all have inflammation. It's leading to UTI infections, sinus infections. It's leading to ear infection. It's leading to all these downstream issues that you're seeing a bunch of different doctors for. But nobody from Stanford Med School on down is trained what the underlying cause is. And the fact is, and if you really peel back and see inflammation, in case he started doing this, as a cause and an underlying issue with a lot of things that are popping up, our body is in a heightened sense of inflammation at all times. That's heavily documented. Why is that? Well, our body's reacting to foreign influences in our body, right? Inflammation throughout all of evolution is a welcome good thing. If there's an issue in the body, our body summons forces and attacks that. The problem is that we are literally putting as the foundation of our diet foreign substances in our body. And an average American right now is in a heightened state of inflammation where their body is reacting to foreign invaders from our food. That is literally what's happening. And why you hear this inflammation and chronic inflammation being a scourge of society and root cause, it's literally food. We're putting foreign stuff into our bodies. So Casey had that awakening, and that is not something that the vast majority of doctors even understand. They are just there to cut out the symptom. They're there to prescribe the obesity medication. They're there to cut open your inflammation. They're there to do the heart bypass. They're there to prescribe the statin. They're there to prescribe the metformin. It's not working. Of course, by the industrial complex you talk about of siloing all these diseases and having, the president of Stanford Med School, the dean of Stanford Med School talking about, doing papers on that one little square inch and everyone having their little niche. That allows the conferences, that allows for everyone to feel like a hero, but nobody's actually solving the problem, which again, perversely just keeps this industrial system going, because when nobody is asking why everyone's getting sick, more people are getting sick and there's more things to do.
Yeah. And I think it's truly nefarious as well how much there's a concerted effort to normalize the unhealthy life as a normal, healthy life. What is your experience with that? Like in terms of, we see right now, you look at, say, fitness magazines and beauty magazines and fashion magazines, it's very common that they'll show somebody who's extremely obese on the cover. And I think it was GQ or one of these magazines that had someone who was clearly obese and they're saying this is healthy. And I mean, there isn't any compelling evidence, scientific, that can lead you to say that we've managed to discover how to make obesity healthy. It's just that it's become so prevalent and so normalized that we've just learned to accept that these physical manifestations have no relation to underlying health issues, when of course they do. It's right. Very obvious that they do.
Right. So this is my contribution to that, from literally like helping these food companies advance this exact objective. It's not that complicated. When a company has an objective, like a food company, to normalize, this, what used to be a treat, sugar, as, just widely accepted, right? They ask, how do we influence institutions of trust? That's the number one question, right? So the firm I worked for 10 years ago actually was the lead firm for cigarette companies. And there's memos now that have been released as part of what led to the cigarette addictions. But in the 80s and 70s, they literally wrote the playbook, and this is public now, but they're like, we need to find institutions people trust. One of those is research institutions. Another is civil rights institutions. On research institutions, they quoted it for the cigarette companies. They said, research is like moms, like everyone trusts them. The more research, the better. So in the case of food, right, let's get back into the civil rights group. So, sitting across from the NAACP in 2012, the Coke executives, it was kind of disturbing patriarchal language that was being used. It's like, well, lower income folks, they love their soda. It's totally patriarchal and a nanny state for us to take that soda. One of the joys lower income people get, after a hard day's work. So we've got to keep that, soda in the hands of lower income folks. And, can we do a campaign to say that it's a nanny state and even racist, to suggest that we should be limiting and infringing on the freedom of these, lower income folks who just want their Coke. And that's the message that was carried. There's contemporary reporting in the New York Times on my tweet thread but it was African-American pastors and the NAACP and the Hispanic federations, joining hands and saying how really racist it would be to take that small joy, this treat from their communities. Of course, there's two big problems here. One is this isn't a nanny state. The nanny state is the fact that the government's paying tens of billions of dollars for diabetes water that is decimating the cells of lower income populations and is addictive, right? There's nobody saying that we should take Coke away. I think most drugs should be legal. We shouldn't be subsidizing with government money. So that was what the argument. So it's a total perversion of the nanny state argument, right? But that just shuts down. So it was a conscious effort, right? It's like, well, if the NAACP and the Hispanic Federation is saying this is racist, who are we? Now that leads up to today. So today, what you have is you have two big elements happening here. So you have actually millions and millions of dollars directly going from food companies to body positivity influencers. So you have body positivity influencers on TikTok saying, like literally giving instructions to people on TikTok, saying that it is completely inappropriate for doctors to be weighing patients, to be saying that we should be calling and shaming doctors for weighing patients or even asking about weight because it's pseudoscience to say that obesity is a health condition. Those influencers are being paid directly by soda companies and Nestle and other processed food companies. That's coming out. So there's actually a conscientious, systemized effort to pay body conscious influencers on TikTok to spread this information about obesity not being a condition. So that's kind of at that end. That's at the TikTok. That's kind of the new battlefront. At the high end, you've got an absolute all-out assault happening right now to label obesity as genetics, as not tied to personal decision making. And we, unfortunately, people who care about science, real science, are losing this battle. So the Ozempic maker, the drug that has the potential, if this is approved for Medicare, Medicaid funding, to be one of the most successful drugs in American history. Last year, they made 400,000 individual payments to doctors, over $30 million, not research funding, direct bribes to doctors. It's on the CMS website, and have absolutely strangleholded every doctor that talks about obesity, because any doctor that is trying to treat obesity, this is a manna from heaven, a weekly injection where the label says that the patient has to stay on this drug for life, because if you go off this drug, you gain more weight than you originally had, and there's unknown metabolic factors that lead to a lot of other side effects. So you have a full court press, and what does that money get us? What do those financial incentives get us? The FDA panel that's approving obesity drugs is not FDA bureaucrats. It's people from Harvard and other elite institutions who are obesity experts. To a person, they have financial conflicts with the drug. Then you have the media, 60 Minutes, which is the majority of their funding, their ad funding comes from pharma, ran a segment with doctors directly paid by Ozempic saying obesity is genetic. They did not disclose those conflicts. And then literally almost like a comedy before and after that segment saying that this condition, this problem that's only been 50 years old is genetic, which is just absurd. Before and after that segment, there's pharma ads. And then a woman, Dr. Fatima Stanford, that was on that 60 Minutes piece just 2 days ago, was appointed as one of the chief people, as we mentioned, on the FDA nutrition panel for 2025. And she's a Harvard doctor, paid tens of thousands of dollars per year directly by this. She's a paid spokesperson. There we are. These folks, these obesity are literally, they're being paid by the drug companies. They're setting the FDA standards. They're talking on the press with no disclosures, and they're creating our kids' nutrition guidelines. So imagine somebody, right, and a philosophy now making childhood nutrition guidelines for 2025 who dispute the idea of obesity being caused by diet. That is literally what they're disputing. We're losing this battle, and it's a big problem. And it's all just based on money. You just follow the money.
Yeah, let's listen to her.
If you diet, you lose weight, right?
The number one cause of obesity is genetics. That means if you are born to parents that have obesity, you have a 50 to 85% likelihood of having the disease yourself, even with optimal diet, exercise, sleep management, stress management. So when people see families that have obesity, the assumption is, what are they feeding those kids?
That's pretty amazing if you think about it. I mean, it's astonishing how this is just becoming very normal in most people's mind. That it's within a few years you're going to be considered a crazy conspiracy theorist if you say that diet is related to obesity and health. We're headed there. It's all genetics. It's all out of your control. And the only way to fix it, of course, is patented drugs. Like all of life's problems, they can only be fixed by patented drugs.
I want to make an optimistic pitch, because what's happening now is nothing more, right, than the playbook that's been used for decades, which has led to the problem. This is the same thing as what you talked about early on, where the sugar companies funded Harvard and Harvard led to the food pyramid. When that food pyramid came out in the 90s, and you had, 60 Minutes and other, specials with Harvard scientists saying, oh, sugar's fine, sugar doesn't cause obesity, there was a lot less questioning, right? So I think in some respect, the same playbook is being used, but I do think there's a bottom-us up revolution happening. I think, as we talked about earlier, it's being led by Bitcoiners, which I think is, to me, a larger umbrella of folks who are, questioning the incentives and the matrix that we exist in, and feeling empowered to ask some first principle questions, and feeling empowered not to be just batted down by elites, and degrees and told not to ask any questions. So I think there's a big movement of that philosophy that's been awakened, a sleeping giant, in the past couple years. I think that there's just a lot of normal folks, I think similar to me. I mean, it's very basic, but you look backwards at our parents. I think our parents are suffering, much more chronic conditions and health issues than they should be, and dying earlier in the case of my mom. And then looking forward at kids. I mean, I think anyone that has a kid right now is not happy about what's going on, and things aren't adding up. So I think there's a lot of questions being asked, and it is a little bit dispiriting. I mean, they have absolutely hijacked and taken hostage our institutions of trust on this obesity thing. But it does feel like there's this a lot of people breaking through from the matrix that are listening to these podcasts, that are, installing levels and other bio wearables to actually, oh, wow, that doesn't make much sense. I'm eating what they're saying it's okay to eat, and my glucose levels are going out of control. We are waking up. So this is my theory of change, is that's the base of the pyramid. And then eventually math is going to catch up. We are literally just mathematically going to be, a sick, fat, depressed, infertile society to such a degree that we're not going to be competitive anymore, and something needs to be done. This intervention-based system where instead of, subsidizing and thinking about healthy food for kids, we want taxpayers to pay for a weekly injection for life. It's gonna bankrupt our system. Like this is literally like we're on the verge of bankruptcy. 20% of GDP growing at an increasing rate. It's going to be 40% in 15 years. There has to be a change eventually. We're literally it's not too hyperbolic to say we're going to cease to exist as a country. So I just think we need to keep pounding on this, and bringing the Bitcoin kind of questioning first principle philosophy to, I think, the most important first order issue for our world, which is how our brains perceive reality. If our brains are experiencing mass metabolic dysfunction, that shrouds how we see reality, and that's happening to a systematic degree. We've got to kind of understand this is a first order issue and keep pushing on it.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you entirely. Daniel has a question for you.
Great.
Or more like a rant, he says.
Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I've got a link here. So
yeah,
I think, and thank you, Calley, for everything. I'll just hit it up here. Your old mate Warren Buffett here. So here we go.
I drink probably 5 12-ounce Cokes a day, and that's about 700 calories. And I've been doing it more or less all my life. I can't imagine anybody that feels better than I do. I mean, I'm happy. I enjoy life. And I've always wondered if I'd had a twin and he had to eat broccoli and asparagus and Brussels sprouts and done it every day, and I'd been drinking my Coke and eating potato chips, and there's some cookies that also have 100 calories per ounce. Which of us? I think the other guy would be gone. I mean, I think he probably would have committed suicide. Actually. And he certainly wouldn't feel as good about life as I do. I feel good every day.
It is an example of what's called a cascade, where consensus becomes fact. And we've had in the past that red meat causes heart disease, which we now know probably isn't. It's not that simple. And I've talked to Andrew about this. Looking at sugar's link to diabetes or obesity, even the best study that I've seen, there's all these caveats that it's impossible to do a controlled experiment where you get rid of all the other external factors to actually pinpoint what's going on there, because there's genetics, there's all these different things, but it becomes, consensus suddenly becomes fact, and it's just, and it's hurting Coca-Cola right now. And as a shareholder, there's also microaggression and safe zones. And the world is a little bit crazy right now, Warren, in terms of political correctness.
Yeah, well, I'll make 2 points. I do think you live longer if you're happy. On balance, I would bet on the person who's extremely happy, living longer than somebody that's sour every day of the year. But beyond that, if you eat 3,500 calories and you burn up 2,700, I don't care what it is, you're going to get fat. And it's a question of how much you put in and what your metabolism is. And at the annual meeting, we had talked about Coke in the early part. And when I went to lunch, I bought 3 candy bars, and each one of those candy bars had over 200 calories, whereas a 12-ounce can of Coke has a little under 150. So one of those candy bars, you're getting more calories and you're getting a lot of sugar, and I just think it's a little It's a little crazy. They've been selling Coke since 1886. You know, they sold sell 1.9 billion 8-ounce servings a day. That's 693 billion servings a year of Coca-Cola products, one kind or another. And I, you know, if you want to eat way the hell more than you burn up,
right?
You know, you're going to have some health problems.
You know, you can throw GMOs and preservatives and kale and even in my book, even CO2. But I mean, all these things at this point, the cascade of where consensus becomes, you know, unquestionable dogma and science. It's just we're living in a weird age.
Wow,
that's amazing.
Wow.
So these are the guys, by the way. Yeah. It's like what you were talking about earlier, how they're just trying to normalize it. But this is Warren Buffett killing his own book on national television because he invested in the stock. And these are the same guys that call Around to Bitcoin on a Bitcoin podcast, but they call Bitcoin rat poison. Mm-hmm. And Charlie Munger the other day was on stage saying that Bitcoin is immoral and unethical. Whereas Shilling diabetes water, I think you called it, Calley, that's perfectly fine. I find these people so reprehensible. It's just disgusting.
Yeah, they really bring it to Bitcoin. They don't want the little people to be questioning anything. You know, watching that, you know, a part of me, it's reprehensible, as you said, but a part of me has admiration for him as an investor. I mean, he is literally, you know, built his career off drugs. I mean, you know, these are highly addictive drugs that are heavily subsidized by the government and a chummy media that he just kind of laughs about, as 25% of kids have prediabetes, which is inextricably linked to the fact that this diabetes water, which is evolutionarily unprecedented, you know, has been not just even available. And we don't even want to get into it. Like, let's not even get into like, I'm libertarian, it's subsidized, right? Him and his chummy relationships with the levers of power have led to this diabetes water being subsidized tens of billions of dollars over the course that he's owned that stock, hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayer money has gone to push those addictive drinks to kids, you know, leading to lifetime customers. So yeah, from an investment perspective, I admire it, but you know, I just really want to hang my hat on that. It's like, let's not even get into a conversation about banning it. It is evil. It is evil that Warren and many other people who push Coke push to subsidize it with government money, with government nutrition money, with both school programs, which I have not heard Warren Buffett speak out against, which subsidize Coke for kids. Many tens of millions of kids depend on school lunches paid for by the government. Coke, food stamps, 15% of people rely on, number one item, and then shameful subsidies which subsidize the core ingredients in Coke, particularly corn, high fructose corn syrup, you know, to tens of billions of dollars. Like, this is wrong. We are subsidizing the poisoning of our kids, which is leading to trillions of dollars, which Warren hasn't spoken about either, trillions of dollars of downstream health costs for the American taxpayer. It's unconscionable.
You mentioned the Heritage Foundation, and there is a group of supposedly free market economists who would tend to call themselves free market, who end up essentially being apologists for the status quo. And that is true in the case of money. You know, they're out there saying free markets, but they'll tell you the Fed is doing a great job because, you know, given the politics and the political constraints, then we need to compromise and we need to be realistic, and we need a Fed that has a more free market leaning monetary policy. And similarly, with these kind of things, they have these kind of dismissive explanations that, well, you know, the market wants this and people want to do it and people want that food and the government is just giving it to them. And of course, this falls apart with any kind of critical inspection when you think about this idea, because on the one hand, well, yeah, if they don't have to listen to the government, then the government doesn't have to take their money and destroy their currency in order to finance these fake scientists to get on TV and tell them to eat garbage. So just because people can ignore them doesn't mean that it's okay to rob people in order to promote this criminal, idiotic pseudoscience. But even more concretely is the fact that, as you mentioned, in particular in schools and hospitals, and I would add prisons as well, in these three places, government science is enormously detrimental to the health of the people that are on the receiving end of government food, because hospitals, they have all these guild licensing requirements wherein they need to adhere to certain standards, and that means sticking by the scientific standards for what is good food to be serving in these contexts. And that usually means industrial garbage, of course. Well, not usually, always means industrial garbage. And similarly with public schools, where tens of millions of children are poisoned every day with industrial waste as well. And of course, prisons, which are just the extension of public schools. That's tens of millions of people every day eating this slop that is recommended based on these guidelines. So even if you say, well, government is going to government, and people have to have the responsibility of eating as they decide, it's on top of the fact that you've compromised, as you said, the scientific institutions and turned them as an attack vector against people, you are literally shoving that food down tens of millions of people's throats every day, because these food companies get the government to buy all of that slop from them, and then they feed people with it.
Yeah, and you've hit on this in your books so well. It's just this fiat system that you talk about. I think one problem, you're watching that Buffett quote and hearing the dynamics you're talking about, is a lot of these institutions have become jobs programs, right? So we were able to ignore the damage that's being done to the underlying physiology of our brains and bodies, which is what, really determines our happiness and outlook on the world. And I'm not trying to get too deep there, but literally that is what metabolic dysfunction is. That's what diabetes is. Diabetes is cellular dysfunction. If 50% of the country is pre-diabetic or diabetic, that means we're experiencing mass cellular dysregulation. That's literally 20% of our cells are in our brains. It's highly correlated with depression, suicide. It impacts our outlook on the world. But we're able to ignore that because of these chummy Davos panels where Warren Buffett's joking about the money he's made on Coke and all the people Coke employs. And from the schools, which is one of the largest most employed industries, to hospitals, which is medical is the most employed industry, to where you have conservative politicians. I was recently in Texas watching the governor of Texas, a conservative, give a speech about how proud he is that the healthcare industry is the largest employer in Texas, and that the new, Texas Medical Center in Houston is so large it can be seen from space. It's these aren't good things, right? But we've allowed both the left and the right to brag about the employment, growth in health, the employment growth in food, the employment growth in school. It's the fact that these are jobs programs, have kind of allowed us to actually not ask questions on why we need so many pediatricians, why we need hospitals that can be seen from space. That's not necessarily a good thing, and that industrial complex isn't good. Another thing that I think is very powerful, calling out some of my former, employers and allies like the Heritage Foundation, is there's a real draw of the club. You just watch Warren Buffett there, at the CNBC, you can just imagine him. It's you don't want to upset the apple cart here, right? The Heritage Foundation people, one of the top people there. Oh, yeah, obviously we do a little bit of that. We don't need to talk about the pay to play. We know the same people. We went to Harvard together. It's this pull. And, I'm not doing anything that brave here or anything, but one thing I do think about is I don't give a shit anymore. Kids are getting prediabetes at an exponential rate. It's just this chummy little club is just it's bullshit. You have even the richest person in the world, Bill Gates, just compulsively wanting to join the club, compulsively talking just the standard issue points about pharmaceuticals and about processed food. It's why? It's why are the richest people in the world so insecure that they need to be on the Davos panel talking about these institutions and butting up to these institutions that are causing obvious violence to Americans. It's just an interesting, you've talked about this, but it's an interesting force that does absolutely seem to pull people.
Yeah, it's it's pretty depressing how normalized it is, as you say, and you see it everywhere. And it's sad because most people are decent, and so they just assume everybody around them is decent, and their mechanisms of how you navigate society in a civilized society is, you look around you and you don't think that everybody has to be a psychopath who's out there to make an enormous profit at your expense. Like, it's just too ugly to imagine it. But the way that this institution is set up, the way that this system works, is just it's set up for it. It's set up in that way, and I think ultimately it comes down to the fact that government policy is up for grabs, and it is enormously influential in this regard because government gets to print money. This is where I tie it all back into the fiat system. Ultimately, once the government has the control of the money printers, then it becomes possible for every special interest to direct it in a way that is extremely impactful, that it'll completely warp people's perception of what is real and what is not. And so you make it so that everybody thinks that industrial slop is food, and everybody can believe it because, after decades and decades and decades of nutritionists and doctors repeating this, it gets hammered into people's minds and they just go along with it. And this is why, I call it fiat food, because it's financed by fiat science, but also it's fiat food because the notion that we are calling this stuff food is essentially imposed on us by fiat. It's all of these enormous subsidies that these companies get that rig the market enormously for people and make, it exacerbates the costliness of healthy food. The fact that so much productive capacity is taken towards producing nutrient-free drugs that are cheap, that are highly profitable, means that a lot of productive capacity is not dedicated to producing actual nutritious food. And so that's making real nutritious food more expensive, and it's flooding the market for everybody with enormously cheap, very harmful food. So it's massively distortionary for the economy that you cannot, it's very difficult to escape it.
I mean, the opportunity cost is just massive, and we just kind of accept it. I again, just like $4 trillion spent in the healthcare industry. Like, it actually, like, you kind of think it's inevitable, right? That we have this system that like just incentivizes interventions once you get sick. It actually, like, designing it from any type of blue sky, on down, like just first principles on, you would never do that. You'd ask fundamentally with healthcare, how do we keep people healthy? And it's a decision we make, right? It's just a foregone conclusion that now we have a very marginal, very problematic obesity cure, which doesn't stop kids from eating inflammatory foods that are going to make them sick in other ways. It's just a foregone conclusion. We're going to subsidize that with Medicare, Medicaid, and our tax advantage, spending. We are on verge of hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidizing that drug. And it's just like that paradigm, that doesn't even make any sense. It's like, from the opportunity cost of that money, what if you took that $100 billion, and asked, how do we keep people healthy? How do we actually incentivize and price in some of the externalities in our food? Not even mentioning, maybe we shouldn't even be spending that money on anything. Maybe we should be actually having a free market where we're not rigging the system, in various ways. But what's happening, right? What's happening with those choices is the U.S. now spends half on food as a percentage of GDP as some other European countries. We've just totally just like sidelined food. And a tomato or a vegetable, an organic vegetable in the United States, often has an order of magnitude less, like 90% less in some respects, nutrients than a tomato grown in like Sardinia, Italy, like on the hillside, with pure soil. Like, our soil is literally like being degraded to like an exponential degree. Like, there's some crazy documentaries, Kiss the Ground on Netflix. So this is all just like these prioritizations are literally making the food itself, dramatically less nutritious and nutrient dense than it was 30 years ago. So yeah, I think it's, I think we've kind of been put in this box, and everyone talks about healthcare reform and how do we get more access? How do we we don't need more access to the system. The problem with our system right now isn't that not enough people don't have enough access to drugs. The problem is the incentives. The problem is that fundamentally every single institution in health, from medical schools to insurance companies to pharma companies to hospitals, they make money when more people are sick and lose money when people are healthy. That's the problem. Like, we need to blow up that. We will never get healthier until we blow up that incentive, which is really much more structural. We're being just lulled into this, oh, how do we incrementally like improve insurance or, improve medical records or get more people drugs? So, that's what the system has done. And as you've alluded to, and I think the greatest design of the system, the greatest victory of the system is that it's able to take good people. It's like any evil system throughout history. When you're able to create a system so complex that good people can come into it, right, and feel their unique, role in that system and be able to go to sleep at night, but the larger system itself is causing devastation and violence, like, you have a really dangerous system. And that's exactly what we have. Like, I think very tragically, the US literally is a magnet for the best and brightest people in the world who come here to be doctors. But now doctors, once they get through medical school, have the highest depression rate, highest suicide rate, and highest burnout rate of any profession. I think it's because they are dedicated, but that the system is broken, and see that they're actually not leading to patients getting better, and feel trapped because of hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt and their entire, all their, it was tough for my sister to leave after, hundreds of thousands of dollars and, Stanford degrees and her entire identity at 31 being tied up with this success. Most people aren't able to do that, and that leads to severe depression.
I believe so. I think this is really the case. I think I felt something similar doing a PhD in economics and realizing that it was all nonsense.
Right.
At a certain point, I just decided like this. There's no way that this is going to be a good, healthy way to go through life, doing something you don't believe in. And I think that's what made me so susceptible to Bitcoin. That's what made me so receptive, I should say, not susceptible. Receptive is the right word. More receptive to the idea that Bitcoin could make sense, because, it was something that existed outside of the system and how the system says things could work. In just like in nutrition, you're not supposed to be healthy if you don't eat your recommended rations of industrial slop every day, and yet you can. And with Bitcoin, we're not supposed to have a deflationary money that works. If the money's supply doesn't increase to match the growth in the economy, then we'd have deflation, and then the economy would crash, and we'd get depressions. And yet Bitcoin continues to grow, and it continues to be deflationary, and it continues to work, and it continues to refuse to fail. So I think there's definitely something that the internet allows the suppressed ideas that in the analog world were effectively suppressed, because communication had to go through central points that controlled things. There was the Harvard Nutrition School, and they had a very strong impact on what got written in all the newspapers and all TV. And without an internet, they could have their field day, basically promoting all of these crazy ideas. Well, now it gets much more complicated. It's a lot more difficult for them to do this, because people can communicate on the internet, and they can communicate separately and independently, and they're witnessing independent information being disseminated that shows the exact opposite. And people who stick by this information, who listen to the alternative information, end up doing much better than people who don't.
100%. And I think it's content in the medical field. I think it's a similar thing. It's content scales, and there's an insane amount of content happening that I'm very encouraged by, from Bitcoin podcasts to health podcasts to general interest podcasts. I mean, this is what Joe Rogan, on down is talking about. So, I think the fact that these conversations are happening I think everything eventually gets to health. And when we start unpacking incentives, it's like the way to control people and the way to really control society is impacting the cells in our brain. So I think it is amazing, right? That from so many different perspectives, we're analyzing these incentives, and again, I think a really disruptive force. Something I'm very bullish on is I think we're going to absolutely and completely disrupt pharma and the doctor's office with this trend of knowing more about what's happening in our body. If we know, if we have an MRI on what's happening in our body in real time, I think it really makes us less susceptible to being lied to. When we're being told that orange juice, is highly encouraged, and those Lucky Charms are highly encouraged, and then we actually see how those impact our glucose levels, and eventually, I think having more biomarkers like hydration and ketones, and there's 30 other biomarkers that I think we're going to have real-time insight to over the next 10 years. It's kind of hard to lie and gaslight patients then. So I actually, I think it's the same principles of just like content that's first order questioning, whether it's our financial system, whether it's our health system. I think it's all very connected. And I think it's very hopeful, because I think one person, trying to just, plot out principles for themselves and their families just with their own intellect and own questions, I think can get to much better answers than being battered over the head with a bunch of these, PhD papers and experts. I think we're seeing a shift.
Absolutely. I think there is, the drive toward the people using all of these monitors and all of this data is extremely useful, because a lot of these people are being able to discover it. And I think the sugar, the blood sugar level one is one of the most important, because you can see it. Like if you eat meat, your blood sugar stays stable. If you eat highly processed grains, your blood sugar spikes. And so if your problem is a blood sugar spike, it seems very obvious that maybe you should avoid the foods that do that. So it is very useful. The conclusion that I've come up with is honestly that I don't think nutrition is that intellectually interesting or that difficult or that complicated.
I agree.
All of the species that exist on Earth are able to eat and survive and not develop all of these metabolic syndrome and diabetes and all of these diseases that we have. They're all able to do it without having a single PhD in nutrition. All of the lions and the giraffes and the elephants and the birds and the ants, they all figure out what to eat. So they don't, they don't have any nutritious and PhDs. And, we like to think of ourselves as being special, but really eating is not something unique to us as human beings. And it's not a cognitive function. It's a bodily function that we share with a lot of animals. So I don't find it to be all that complicated. And in fact, it's pretty simple. Like with all of the animals, every animal out there will eat red meat if it got the chance to it. The only animals that don't eat red meat don't eat it because they can't hunt, and so they make do with other stuff. But the most nutrients are present in red meat. It's the most nutritious food out there. And my personal kind of shortcut and just lazy thing is that I just don't like to think about this issue so much, and I just eat red meat when I'm hungry, and I drink water when I'm thirsty, and that saves me a lot of heartache and a lot of worrying about what to eat right now and planning this meal and following what the latest science in PubMed is. I'm a very, very bro science approach to it, where red meat works, and I don't want to think about food in any way that is more complicated than that. And also, like, having tried eating red meat only for now, it's been like almost 7.5 years, 7 years and 3 months so far. I haven't tried that then. Like, there's never been a point at which I've introduced any kind of food and felt that it improved on just red meat and water. I mean, I cheat occasionally, but I'm not kidding myself into thinking that this is good for me. I can feel why it is not good for me, and it's just, you never feel better than red meat and water. That's the kind of very simplistic answer that you could come out with all of this thing. And the reason that you don't need to despair is that you don't need to worry about what all of these corporations are putting into all of your different foods that you're eating, because if you just get red meat, you're basically fine.
It's such a profound point. I hope everyone hears that point. Is like, if I had a bun and it would eliminate every nutrition school in the country, we would be such a healthier country. And I think it gets to a more like almost spiritual or philosophical point, which is like, we need to just like have trust in our body's evolutionary capability to know what it needs. We have to have trust and awe of like the wonder and interconnectedness of our body. I do not think it is modern. It is not progress that we've segregated the body into 42 different, parts and produced tens of thousands of studies saying how complicated things are. We will never understand like the wonder of our body, right? And have this right. And I think like going back to an evolutionary perspective of like that point about other animals, it's like, I think we do like know what's best for us. And I think if we just sit back and use first principle thinking of the type of food that our children should be ingesting, it's like, let's stick to what evolutionarily they're made to ingest and eat over, tens of thousands of years. I think a related point, a message I really try to get out, I think is just absolutely key, is just curiosity when you face these, almost like rites of passages for the American patient. I go back to my mom. I was born in utero with metabolic dysfunction. She suffered with prediabetes. I was born at 12 pounds, which shows that I might have had some metabolic dysfunction. And it was like, and she had gestational diabetes, and the doctors are like, oh, it's fine. This is, 25% of women have gestational diabetes. Take this pill. It wasn't like a warning sign. It's like, oh, it's fine. Oh, the kid's fine. I end up having to take a bunch of antibiotics, have ear infections, just take more antibiotics. So then you grow up and my mom has elevated cholesterol. Oh, most people your age take a statin. Here's a statin, elevated blood glucose, right? Oh, metformin, that's normal. We face all of these like milestones almost as rites of passage now in America. And very few patients, right, actually are sat down and said, well, what's actually physiologically happening to make this biomarker of your triglycerides off the charts? Or what's happening to your cells that so much glucose is flooding your cells that there's like now excess blood in your, there's excess sugar in your blood, like, which is evolutionarily we never like have like awe or wonder from the medical system about what actually is happening. It's like literally our cells are being bombarded with so much glucose and sugar. It's like our like blood sugar is out of it. It's like, what does that mean? Like, no, it's take a pill. And I am kind of amped up on this, I would say, because my mom, she had kids now who are on this. She was trying to be very healthy. She shopped at Whole Foods. But she was left, like many Americans, kind of just left discarded, right? It's just like not, educate. These were all warning signs. And then eventually that leads more often than not to a chronic condition that will kill you, as it did for her. And, she got on this train later, and my sister and I, she gave her a lot of books, and she died surrounded by all these books on blood sugar, on independent thinking with healthcare, on, the tumor was growing too early. It was too late for her. But like, I will say that does inspire me. I mean, she now lives in us. I mean, I think just being actually curious about the body and interconnectivity about like our health issues, I think really does lead to happiness. It led to happiness in her final days, just being on that journey, and it inspired us. So I would just say that too. It's like simplify like how you think about health, but also just like, I don't know. I think it's actually just a great journey to be on when you are prescribed a statin or a metformin or all these other rites of passages, just to be a little bit more curious about what the interconnectivity is and maybe how to prevent and reverse it. You can prevent and reverse these things really quickly through food. And it's just not talked about in the traditional medical system.
Yeah, it's so blatant how very obvious this is, that if there's no money to be made in it, then we don't even consider it.
It's obvious,
Yeah, and it's, you see it also with even with drugs that are off patent, where as we saw in many cases, like all of these drugs can be effective for conditions, but they don't get publicized. In fact, they get fought because there's no money to be made from drugs that are off patent. You need to get the patented stuff. Because that's what makes the money, and that's what finances the scientists who get on your TV and on your newspaper and tell you that only the patented, highly lucrative stuff is what works. Yeah, so I guess, I think the conclusion that we could come to is that pretty much most of what we think of as science when it comes to nutrition and health is probably cooked up by marketing departments. I'm going to jump to that conclusion. You're welcome to join me.
Don't trust the peer review. We fall for it every time. A news article with a peer reviewed study, those are public relations documents. And it's a simple point, but we need to be empowered and not believe that study. I would say it as a baseline.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Calley, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a lot of fun. Appreciate your time, and it's been enormously depressing, but at the same time kind of hopeful because I think more and more people are beginning to realize this is the case.
Thank you for asking so many questions about our foundational systems. And I do hope the message is empowerment, because I think understanding how the incentives of our systems work is the first step to true empowerment. So thank you so much for hosting this conversation.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
Thank you.